Good afternoon and welcome to the Feed My Mind podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by Chris Kelly today, the founder and owner of Medicine Path and Kambo Path. Chris specializes in sacred medicine and psychedelic therapies. So Chris, I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you. So Chris, you deal in plant-based medicines. Are you able to give a bit of a background as to who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Sure. So you mentioned my website, Medicine Path. On that particular website, in as brief as explanation as possible, I describe myself as a ceremonialist, an educator, an explorer, and a modern day medicine man. And to deconstruct that a little bit, I'm a ceremonialist in the context of holding various forms of sacred ceremonies. I'm an educator primarily through written word, through the articles that I write on both of my websites and on social media. And I'm an explorer, so far as exploring consciousness goes, the cartographer of consciousness, as I like to say, and a modern day medicine man. And the way that I like to articulate, or the way that I say, the reason I say modern day medicine man is because, well, I see that through the lens of incorporating the ancient practices and philosophies with modern tools of technologies and the things that fall under that umbrella term, using those as medicine for the body, mind, spirit, nature, reconnection, realignment. But as I was saying to you earlier, those are only some of the roles and some of the identities that I kind of slip and slide into, and we all have our roles and identities that we go into. You know, I'm also a father, I'm a gardener, I'm a musician, I'm a partner, all of those things. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's a little bit of an introduction into, a very brief introduction into who I am. So there's many different pathways where we could go from here.
For sure. Now, what's really interesting is I'll touch briefly on your background in the sense that you started as a drummer in a band touring the world, and then now you're working as a modern day medicine man and, like you said, a cartographer of consciousness, helping people with and through plant-based medicine. So, if you just give us a quick update of your background as a drummer, and then what led you to down the path that you're on at the moment.
It wasn't necessarily touring around the world. I wasn't that big, although at the time that was the aim, to get to a point where I was touring around the world and playing drums, because that's all I wanted to do back when I was younger. Touring around Australia, primarily in pop punk bands and punk bands, which is a far echo of the place that I'm in today. Super, super fun times, but if you know anything about that rock and roll lifestyle, as I was saying, full of debauchery, naughty behavior, lots of fun and play and partying, but certainly not the lifestyle that I live now, and certainly not the lifestyle for me now. Throughout a lot of that time playing drums, I didn't spend any time learning. Insofar as self-development kind of goes, evolving as a human being, just attaining knowledge, information, wisdom. And there came a point in time where I realized I didn't quite know who I was, and I'd lost myself in this world of, unconscious patterns and programs and behavior and conditioning that were passed on to me all along the way, that was kind of surrounded in this fog and mist of playing drums and partying and living that rock and roll lifestyle. So I had a bit of an awakening moment when an old relationship ended. I realized that I had a lot of unconscious patterns and programs relating to jealousy, control, manipulation, which all really stem from insecurities deep within, self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence. And to try and mask a lot of that, I would kind of masquerade as this confident alpha type person playing drums in a band. But deep inside, I was just a little boy who didn't really know who I was and trying to navigate my way in this world. So that spark came and I thought, I've spent all of this time playing drums but not learning, so I delved into the world of philosophy, psychology, biology, consciousness, plant medicines, ceremonial and rituals and rites of passage, all that kind of thing, and got to a point where I was working with cannabis, not recreationally like I had in the past, and heavily abusing it, but from a point of reflection and introspection. And there was one particular night, I remember it clear as day. I'd already known about various plant medicines, shamanic plant medicines such as ayahuasca, wachuma, iboga, psilocybin mushrooms, things of this nature. And I was sitting in my room on YouTube watching someone talk about their experiences drinking ayahuasca. Very heavily under the influence of cannabis. And there was a spark that went off, just a definite shift in consciousness where I thought I have no other choice but to go down to the jungles of Peru and seek out the shamans and start working with some of these plant medicines, in particular ayahuasca, for the continued evolution of myself and my spiritual growth. So from that moment onwards, I just put all of my money and all of my attention into learning more about plant medicines and shamanism, and eventually made the trip over. The rest, as they say, is kind of history, as I kept deepening into this path until I got to this point where I am now.
That's really fascinating. And the thing that I'm most fascinated about with what you've just mentioned is that you were on cannabis when you was something, obviously when you're on cannabis, changed your consciousness to make you want to watch an ayahuasca documentary, which then made you want to go to South America. So based off that, so you've obviously, something's resonated with you from what you were watching. And then what? So you've gone to South America or you've gone to Peru? Tell us about that story.
I spent quite a lot of time when I first had that spark. And when I say quite a lot of time, I mean countless hours upon hours doing a lot of research into various retreat centers, that type of thing. And many people who listen to podcasts will know of Spirit Quest. And I know of Spirit Quest through Joe Rogan, through Aubrey Marcus. And Spirit Quest was the place that stood out to me the most. So that's the place where I went. I spent a couple of weeks there. And, well, I don't know where to go from there, because it's such a rich landscape of discussion talking about plant medicines and the path from there on in. So where would you like to take that?
So I guess just for the listeners, let's just start with, I guess, plant medicines as a whole. Like what are plant medicines, just for the uninitiated or for those that may not know?
Okay. If we're trying to articulate this for people that don't really know, I think it can be helpful to try and deconstruct the terminology, plant medicine. So perhaps let's start with the word medicine. So I guess from a contemporary or a Western or a scientific lens of perception, when we're talking about medicine, we're primarily looking at things through the lens of pharmaceutical medications. Yeah, so that's what we see as a medication. A pharmaceutical medication generally dispensed by someone like a general practitioner, a doctor, a physician of some sort, which are prescribed to treat various physical illnesses, disease, any kind of mental afflictions and disorders such as anxiety, depression, your stresses, bipolar, ADD, ADHD, all those kind of things. And while that certainly has its place, a lot of the times these medications are prescribed to try and treat the symptoms that are being experienced by the patient, rather than getting to the root cause of what's causing the symptoms. When we're speaking about medicine from the context of plant medicines, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are talking about medicine in terms of a mind, body, spirit connection. We're looking at things not just from addressing the physical and the mental, but also the physical, the mental, the emotional, the energetic, and the spiritual. So there are many different plants that have lots of different medicinal kind of qualities or healing qualities to them. For example, we may be working with basic kind of kitchen plants like turmeric and ginger to help with inflammation. Maybe it's something like lemon balm, chamomile to help relax the system, help people out with stress, anxiety. It could be something like, I don't know, what's another general plant off the top of your head?
We could even have, peppermint. There's rosemary.
There's all of exactly.
Things. There's all of these other tools that can be used.
Exactly right.
To help the body in some way.
Yes. There are a special class of plants, though, which we consider sacred plants. And these sacred plants are generally used in a ceremonial context, and they're considered sacred because of their ability to act as catalysts of consciousness. When consumed, when ingested, when worked with, they induce altered states of consciousness, and these altered states of consciousness lead to states of being that allow people to go through this healing work. That's why they're considered medicine, because they help facilitate a deeper realignment to that mind, body, spirit harmonization. So I guess that is a very brief description of what a plant medicine is. Something that works on a holistic framework in terms of our entire energetic system.
And that's I guess probably one of the key differences between, like you said, I guess the sacred or the ancient medicine that has been used for thousands and thousands of years. And this predates obviously Western medicine, like I said, by thousands of years,
tens of thousands
of years. So I think it's unfortunate that we live in a society at the moment which places such high emphasis on modern or traditional medicine, which it's not a bad thing, and as I've heard in other podcasts, if you go and have a car crash or you break a leg for hectic, anything that's major type of trauma incidences, it's fine. You need that type of medicine. But for a lot of the longer term systemic sort of chronic illnesses, we still really have no idea how to treat them. And what's interesting and what I'm seeing more and more of is a turn backwards to have a look at, hey, what were our ancestors doing? And I think one of the most interesting things that you mentioned before is about all of this traditional and sacred medicine looks at the body holistically from a mind, body, spirit perspective, which typically, it's the mind and the spirit, which is something that modern medicine leaves out. So based off this, what are some of the plant medicines that you have personally experienced and that you deal with to help people?
So some of the medicines that I have a deep personal relationship with include the Amazonian brew, Ayahuasca, which I know that you know of, and it's a plant medicine that a lot more people are becoming more familiar with. Another one is the sacred Andean cactus medicine, known as Wachuma. Wachuma is the traditional Quechuan name for the San Pedro cactus. As we mentioned before, there's cannabis. The psilocybin mushrooms played an important role in my earlier exploration of consciousness and development as a person. And although not a plant medicine, it's a sacred medicine, another of my primary allies, as I call it, is Kambo, which is the traditional Amazonian frog medicine. So I like to talk about these sacred medicines using that particular phrasing, sacred medicines, because plant medicines, although a lot of people use that terminology, it kind of, if we're looking at things from that perspective, it kind of leaves out psilocybin mushrooms and things like Kambo, which are not plants. They're animal medicine and also fungi medicine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are some of the primary sacred medicines that I work with.
And what do you mean by the word sacred when you say it's a sacred medicine as opposed to a plant-based medicine? That word sacred?
That word sacred implies something that carries a deep level of reverence towards it. And I think I just mentioned it before, sacred is used because these particular plants, these animals, have the ability to alter our consciousness in such distinct and intense ways that they open up these paradigms. They shift ourselves out of this ordinary state of consciousness to something much more grandiose, and they're often used in a ceremonial context that they are considered sacred because they dissolve boundaries and they open up our lens of perception to see a lot more energies that exist beyond this physical world that we inhabit on a daily basis and that we kind of only really see and navigate through.
Couldn't agree more. It's consciousness. I think we'll go into consciousness a little bit later, but it's such a multifaceted thing. And like you said, to try and describe the experience or a altered state of consciousness from some of these plant-based medicines to someone else who has never experienced it, it would be like trying to tell someone who's blind what color looks like. So and that's the frustrating thing that I find as well with a lot of these plant-based medicines about governments and other bureaucrats who try and regulate these substances without actually having experienced them themselves. So they even don't know what it is or what it's not. But anyway, I want to focus on. So you've obviously you're touring around America. You're playing the drums.
Australia.
You're touring Australia. You then have the realization. You start going into the research about psychedelics, and then you're off to the Amazon. So what happens? What are you doing there? What do you learn?
It's a big question, and there's many different ways to take this. So I guess the primary reason that I went over there to begin with was to learn more about myself, to learn more about my psyche. So as I mentioned, these plant medicines, these sacred medicines allow access to non-ordinary states of consciousness, and to deconstruct that a little bit, we are operating from a place, well, how do I try and language this? A lot of the time that we're navigating the world, we're operating in this kind of conscious world where our consciousness is limited to, I guess, what we might deem as our regular five senses. There's more senses, but eyesight, hearing, taste, touch, our feelings inside, sense of smell. But we have so many subconscious patterns and programs that are really running the show. I think it's something like 90% of our behaviors stem from our subconscious mind. So aside from entering these kind of grandiose worlds that I spoke of, these kind of rich and illuminating multi-dimensional paradigms that appear when you ingest something like ayahuasca or DMT or wachuma or whatever it is, another aspect of the non-ordinary states of consciousness is delving into a lot of the subconscious conditioning and patterns and programs. So a lot of it was about that for me, sitting in these kind of ceremonies where shamans are leading a ceremony or a session. You go up and you drink the brew, and as far as ayahuasca is involved, you're sitting in darkness. The shamans are weaving their icaros, which are songs. They're weaving these songs in with the medicine, which is allowing the experience to shift in certain ways, and they kind of navigate you through with their songs, navigate you through the experience. And through this navigation, it allows you to delve deeper into yourself, because they're facilitating, with their songs, they're facilitating the flow of different energies, which allows these different energies to be felt within. And I guess that's mainly what it was about for me, trying to learn why I was the way that I was. And after some time of working with the medicines, when I say some time, I mean a couple of years, I guess I've reached a point where I thought, okay, I've done a reasonable amount of work myself. I feel like I've laid a solid foundation, and now the work that I undertake with these sacred plant medicines, when I'm going to places like South America or spending time with elders and wisdom keepers, is to try and deepen my connection with the natural world. And you touched on it before. Our modern paradigm doesn't quite allow the room to incorporate, I guess, the spiritual aspect of being. And I think that's where a large part of our disconnection to the planet comes from. It's from this spiritual disconnection. It's because we are so disconnected from the very world that, our great mother, our Mother Earth, that provides, nourishes, nurtures us with absolutely everything that we need. And these natural rhythms of nature is something that our traditional indigenous brothers and sisters from many cultures around the globe were so tapped into. And in our Western paradigm, with our technological advancement, with all of the benefits that come with that, it's been at the detriment of leaving that spiritual connection behind and that nature connection behind, and seeing the world as a deeply animate and conscious, sentient being in itself.
I think that's the most critical part, and I think one of the language you used on your website was re-establishing the right relationship with our planet. And obviously that's both from an individual perspective, but also the collective consciousness of all of us. And I think we are disconnected in many ways, and we have lost our ways. And I think that's why, if you look at holistically at the moment, we've got the highest depression rates that in the Western world, yet we've got the best living standards that we've probably had since that we know of. We've got more obesity than we can even imagine, yet like you said, there is a disconnect with who we are as individuals and our relationship with the planet, and obviously with other plants and conscious things that are on this planet. Where am I going to go with this one? So based off this, I know you've obviously you were well entrenched and you were well embedded with shamans in the Amazon. Very, very simplistic question, but what were some of the key learnings that you took away from that and then brought back with you to Australia?
The first thing that comes to mind, and this was very, very apparent to me in my very first ayahuasca ceremony, is that there are energies, and if I was to get a bit more colorful with my language, there are very real spirits, sentient, intelligent beings that seem to exist in some sort of paradigm outside of this physical material world. That was a big eye-opener to me. Sitting in ceremony and having these experiences which were experienced by me as real, as viscerally as real, and like seeing as just as real as we're having this conversation right now. These experiences where I am communing with ancestors and spirits that are, kind of just being all around me, and then passing on information about them, looking out for me and guiding me on my path, and to, essentially helping me reconnect with myself, reconnect with my heart, and reconnect with nature. So I suppose that was one of the massive learnings, just in seeing that there are unseen energies that exist that we don't normally have access to, that we can have access to through the ingestion of these plant medicines or through other consciousness altering techniques and modalities.
Yep. So it's really interesting, because one thing I want to touch on, and I just want to mention this particularly for those that are listening, is that I was watching a documentary recently, and I was talking about the difference of when you do take some of these plant-based medicines. This was a documentary that was on obviously psychedelics, so they were coming from a point of view that they actually understood. But they were saying that, to the person who hasn't experienced it, they were talking about the differentiation between hallucinations versus extrasensory perception. And I think that's a critical thing that I want to mention, because, if you haven't had a psychedelic experience, it's quite easy for someone to think that when you do take these things that you are hallucinating, versus what you said. And I want to preface it with basically, like you said, you're accessing a different realm, or you're seeing things that may already be there, but we can't access on our normal everyday consciousness. And the best way that I like to use it, and this was an analogy that was used by Graham Hancock, was that what if our consciousness, instead of it's something that's generated in the brain, our brain is actually a receiver of consciousness, and that, on our everyday state of consciousness, walking around, having a chat with people like we are right now, we're on channel 1, and that's the way that we perceive the world. Yet when we take some of these psychedelic medicines, what if we can access channel 2? What if we can access channel 3? And at the same time, it's just like a constant stream of time. So at the same time channel 1's on, channel 2's also on, channel 3's also on. But if you ever only stay on channel 1, we're never going to see what's on channel 2, 3, 4. And I think that's what some of these plant-based medicines give us the ability to do, is to tap into some of these other channels. And, and it might not be hallucinations. Maybe it is that we are able to see things that aren't always there. And I think the most interesting thing of what you said was about the energies and the spirits, because, obviously we are beings of energy. Everything in this planet is energy, and being able to see that, I think, is critical. So being able to access these levels of consciousness, you mentioned about ayahuasca, and that's a sacred brew that's obviously held in the Amazon. Are you able to just briefly explain what ayahuasca is and what you would tend to experience while on ayahuasca?
Okay. Now, I will preface this by saying that I certainly do not have the academic background to talk about the particulars when it comes to the pharmacology and the deep scientific research on the brew. But what I can say is that ayahuasca is typically made up of 2 components. One is the Banisteriopsis carpi vine, and on the other hand, it's generally something like chacruna or some other kind of plant component, some type of leaf that contains DMT. The ayahuasca vine part, so that's what ayahuasca is called, the vine, but the whole brew is called ayahuasca. So the Banisteriopsis carpi ayahuasca vine, that contains the MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is the enzyme that we have in our gut. It inhibits the enzyme so that when we drink the brew, the DMT in the brew is allowed to cross the blood-brain barrier because the enzymes don't destroy it, or what's another better word?
So I guess DMT in its natural form is not orally active. So I guess by having that when we drink it, and you have, like you said, this is it MOA?
MAO, monoamine oxidase.
The monoamine oxidase inhibitor, it actually basically blocks the body's or the stomach's ability to digest it so that we can have it in an oral format.
Exactly. So it's brewed for a long time, sometimes over the course of several days, and it is this brown, earthy, very kind of molasses tar-like liquid. And when drunk, there are many, many different things that can happen. One of the most common is to experience these extraordinary visual states because of the dimethyltryptamine. However, for some people, that's not always the case, and it's important, I think, for people to not get caught up in the visionary world, even though that was a large part of my interest early on was, and to some extent still is, exploring consciousness and exploring what these visionary states have to offer. I think the important part, as I mentioned, is that it acts as a catalyst for us to access information from our subconscious mind to try and go through this process of healing the mind, body, spirit, reconnection, reharmonizing, realignment, to where we are addressing a lot of these childhood traumas that we're experiencing, releasing what no longer is serving us, allowing space within ourselves to come deeper into our truth, our meaning, direction, our purpose in life, connection to heart, coming out of the thinking mind where so many of us tend to reside. Because, and this is kind of deviating a little bit, but if you ask a lot of shamanistic cultures or indigenous cultures where they got their knowledge from, it's not through the thinking mind and through reading books, it's through direct perception of the heart's ability to communicate with plants itself. And that might sound a little bit strange. However, I don't want to get too deep into, I guess, the research because I can't speak to it in depth. However, we do know that the heart emits a very, very strong electromagnetic field. And through this electromagnetic field, everything has an electromagnetic field. And through this, and we're emitting and receiving information. So when we tune in, we get out of the mind and we tune in to the heart, it's then that we can start to access these different streams of information, which includes the streams of information from the plant, which is how I myself and many other people receive information from beings that are non-human.
Absolutely. And another fascinating thing about that, obviously with the energy of the heart, and it does have an electromagnetic field that around us, is that there are also neurons within the heart, which obviously are the neurons in our brain. So that means that obviously from a biomechanical or a biological point of view, it thinks. It's got its own consciousness in a way. And like you said, it's interesting that we've moved away from thinking here to what traditionally might have been thinking from here, and that it seems from what your own personal experience and what the experience of a lot of others who have experienced ayahuasca is that it really breaks down, shuts this off in many ways at a conscious level, and then flips you to go to a subconscious, to a much deeper level, and then it seems like it's much more of a spiritual medicine.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And when you're talking about moving from the head down into the heart, the way that these sacred medicines help facilitate that is to start, in a sense, in layman's terms, shutting down this area at the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is where we hold a lot of our identity, our sense of self, our ability to use reason, logic, rationality. And then when that area of our cells, of our brain, starts to quieten down, then the sweet whispers of the subconscious mind can start to weave themselves into our awareness, which is still left even though our sense of self has dissipated a little bit.
It's not easy to do in today's modern world, though. Today's modern world, we pride ourselves on our intellectual ability and our ability to think, to reason. And I guess the pitfall, or it's got many benefits, of course, where here we are talking on a microphone, filming everything with modern day technology, which was thought of by brilliant people. But at the same time, we're only operating at the conscious level, but I said this world prides itself on, and it rewards those that think in that way, as opposed to, probably traditionally, we have not always used this to think. We've used, like you said, we've used the heart, we've used Mother Nature, we've used our own energies. And it's just interesting that there is a disconnect there. And it's that we're always operating, not even from a psychedelic point of view, but everyday life now, we're always operating up here. And it's very hard to try and switch that off, even just for all of us, to switch this off and just to start, going in here and thinking a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. We live and have grown up in a society, a system, the overarching predominant system, which I think the language that you used was rewards those states of consciousness. Yeah, the states of consciousness, the achieving, the doing, the always striving for more and more. It's a system that has growth, expanded growth as its underlying philosophy, and it doesn't seem like that system there's no place for these kind of states of consciousness or these states of being that we're talking about. So I think that's why it's important for us as individuals to engage in these practices, whether they're ancient practices and philosophies or whatever they are, engaging with them on an individual level, because the work that we're doing inside gets reflected outside. Yeah, it's like it can be a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop depending on how our operating system is inside. So when we are doing the work inside, it's manifesting on the outside world, and then people who are coming into our field they're getting a sense of how we operate on this new kind of paradigm. And I think that's uber important, because I don't think we can really change the system that we're talking about, the system that rewards the advancement and the progression and the striving for more. I think it's important for us to find new systems and to put our energy into that, and to let the old systems slowly crumble away. And I think we're going through that process at the moment, very, very slowly, where things are just going completely haywire. We're, from a collective perspective, we are raping and pillaging the earth, and a lot more people are becoming aware of that, even though in government agencies and the whole political sphere, even though they are turning a blind eye to that, whether conscious or unconscious, I don't know. But yeah, it's slowly crumbling, and a lot of intelligent minds are finding these new systems to develop, and that includes the use of these ancient technologies such as plant medicines, such as meditation, yoga, all the old philosophies that are earth-based and help us reconnect back to nature.
Have you heard about the theory? There's a theory going around at the moment which basically explains that because of how much our species at the moment in modern times has basically stuffed up this planet with, what we're doing to the environment, of how damaging it is, that the earth is responding by giving us these plant-based medicines.
I've heard that.
So I think that's a really interesting theory, to think that the collective planet has a consciousness. It realizes it's being slowly killed off by us, and that it is then obviously growing, or it is giving us the ability to access or see different things by providing us with these plants again. So I think that's a really interesting story. And then to touch on some of the, obviously with a lot of the work, say, of ayahuasca and with a lot of these plant-based medicines, they traditionally initiate from South America. And are you familiar with the story of the eagle and the condor?
The eagle and the condor prophecy.
Yes.
Would you like to share?
You probably know a lot more about it than I do, but I just think it's really interesting because I'll get you to explain the eagle and the condor prophecy.
Okay. In short, the eagle and the condor refer to a prophecy of the north and the south coming together. The eagle being the lands of the north, the Condor being the lands of the South. So we could talk about the North Americas and the South Americas. And the prophecy is, we could also look at it from the thinking, rational, logical mind versus the South, the Condor, which is that connection to heart, that reconnection to nature. And the prophecy is exactly what we're talking about right here. It's the merging of the ancient practices and philosophies with the modern tools and the technologies. It's the North and the South coming together, the eagle and the condor flying together as one.
Because I guess for what my understanding of it was that the eagle was more, like you said, the northern way of thinking, or we could look at it now as like the traditional Western way of thinking. It was a very masculine energy that was dominated by technology and logic and reason and process, and that part of the prophecy was that I think the prophecy was made in the 14 or 1500s, and they said that basically in 500 years' time, which is the time we're living in right now, that both the eagle and the condor will fly together. And the condor being more the feminine energy, like you said, the heart, the spirituality will eventually come together and fly in harmony, and there's going to be a perfect balance. And I think it's really interesting on what we've both just touched on, in the sense that we live in a society that prides itself on technology, on reason, on all those sorts of things, and they have traditionally been rewarded, whereas now we're starting to see a shift in the sense that more people are getting into yoga, more people are meditating, and then also on from a plant point of view, more people are getting into these psychedelics and from plant medicines and trying to get a deeper understanding of themselves, who they are, and their relationship to the planet. So I think it's really interesting that obviously this is a prophecy that's been around for hundreds of years, and it's you can, whichever way you want to interpret it, but it's I think it does have some sort of credibility and some sort of meaning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, there's certainly a relevance to it. Yeah, and we're seeing it at the moment.
For sure. So now I want to talk a little bit more about what you do with your business and with your work. So are you able to start talking a little bit more about some of the ceremonies that you run and some of the experiences that you've had helping others on their journey with plant-based medicines?
Excuse me. Yeah, so I'll talk about one of the medicines that I work with in ceremony, and we touched on it before, Kambo, the traditional Amazonian frog medicine. This particular medicine is from the secretion of the Philomedusa bicolor frog. And this frog resides in the Amazon basin from Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and beyond. Traditionally, this medicine is used for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is it's used before hunting. It's called hunting magic. They use it, Indigenous brothers and sisters, they use it before going out on hunts because they say it enhances their visual acuity, their auditory senses. They say it gives them the cloak of invisibility because in high enough doses it can eliminate human scent for some time, and they can run through the jungle tracking their animals, doing whatever they need to do for a lot longer, so a lot more stamina without needing to eat, sleep, drink as much. Mm-hmm. They also use it as their general jungle medicine. It's called Vaccina da Floresta, so vaccine of the forest, snake bites, malaria, infections, parasites, pathogens, that sort of thing. And they also use it to clear out panema. And panema, loosely translated, means something to the effect of negative energy, dark energy. You feel like you've got a heavy cloud hanging over you. And that could be interpreted in many different ways. So I touched on it before, these different levels of being, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So Kambo can help release energies when it comes to physical illnesses or disease, emotional blockages and challenges, the mental patterns and programs, the unconscious beliefs, dysfunctional beliefs, thought processes, and that spiritual disconnection, that nature disconnection. It's also used to, in a traditional context, to receive energy. And this kind of veers off a little bit, but we're talking about receiving it from a person who is not lazy. It's very, very important for the Indigenous to receive it from a person who isn't lazy, because if they're receiving it from someone with that energy, they will think that you are going to undertake the energy from that person. So this speaks to the importance of doing your research when you are choosing who to go and receive your medicine from, or to go and sit in sacred ceremony from, because there are a lot of practitioners, there are a lot of people serving medicine, and perhaps there are some people that shouldn't be serving medicine, but as I generally say, there seems to be someone for everyone. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of people are coming to Kambo to help release what isn't serving them, yeah? To create space, to be able to call in, to bring in the new, yeah? To walk a new vision, to walk in their truth to a higher degree, to be able to express themselves more with more clarity, more direction, more meaning, more purpose. So there are many different ways of working with this medicine. In a traditional context, Kambo it's not worked with in a ceremonial context because it's kind of just their general jungle medicine. So if someone's sick in the tribe, or if they're going out before a hunt, they don't hold a ceremony like we might hold over here in the West. And we can speak to the importance of ceremony in a moment. But it's just kind of like, okay, well, you need some Kambo, okay, you go to the village elder or the shaman, or if you are skilled or proficient in administering to yourself, they'll do that. And they'll just go through the process. But over here, I feel like there's an importance to incorporate elements of ceremony, ritual, and rite of passage because of all this stuff that we were talking about, because of our severe disconnection to the natural world. Yeah, so it's nice to have a container to help people enter into those streams of consciousness where we can go, okay, yeah, I remember the importance of, say, sitting inside a teepee or sitting around a sacred fire where the elders and all our ancestors used to gather for thousands of years to engage in healing work or tell stories of myth and legend and weave new narratives through the tapestry of existence and through reconnecting to nature. So the way that Kambo is administered is through the lymphatic system. We do this by making small little burn marks in the top layer of skin. The secretion is dried on these sticks. It's reconstituted with water. The small amount of medicine gets placed on these, it's like we're burning like the superficial layer of skin, very akin to a mild blister. The medicine goes in, sucked into the lymphatic system. The effects are felt within, depending on body placement and someone's ability to circulate quickly or slowly, anywhere between, say, 30 seconds to a minute
30
and a half.
seconds to a minute, it's
it comes
in your system.
on very, very, very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's often referred to as ordeal medicine because it can be quite an ordeal to go through. And I think that's an important point to make as well when we're talking about plant medicines, sacred medicines, Kambo, Ayahuasca, whatever it is. Intention is uber important because generally your intention coming into these things is not for recreational purposes. And, while there are some psychedelic substances which can lend themselves to recreational purposes, perhaps one of the more common ones is cannabis, psilocybin mushrooms. A lot of these other traditional medicines are very, very uncomfortable to go through. And there are reasons why we go through them, even though they're so uncomfortable, because we know that going down the path of adversity leads to growth, yeah? Because we have to be able to step outside of our comfort zone to be able to grow as a person, to evolve spiritually, to gain new perspectives, to leave the old ones behind. So one of the main mechanisms of Kambo is to help people purge. So people go through a very intense process, all kind of physiological processes are happening. It tends to be a very physical experience. And it generally, not always, but generally results in the purging. And the purging can be of physical toxins as the medicine kind of navigates its way around the body, cleaning up debris, toxins that we don't want inside the body. It could be the emotional blockages and challenges that are stored on a physical level. And that's another conversation there, looking at how trauma manifests on a mental or an emotional level and how that stores in the physical system, but it can help clear out that. It can help uproot a lot of these unconscious patterns and programs from the mind so they can bubble up to the surface so that we can go, okay, yeah, I'm carrying these patterns and programs from childhood. This is why I'm feeling insecure about myself. This is why I'm angry all the time. Yeah, so it can illuminate these, bring deeper states of self-awareness to a lot of our thoughts, mental patterns. And as I mentioned, it helps people connect back to nature as well. So the way that I facilitate these is in a ceremonial context with, whether it's a one-on-one or a small group of people, and we go through the process with the medicine. It's generally a several hour kind of process, allowing people to go through their experience and rest afterwards, come back to baseline. But that's a very general, brief introduction into this one particular medicine, Kambo.
For sure. So you obviously so Kambo, it's a type of frog excretion.
Yeah,
so it's a type
frog
of
secretion. Yeah,
frog
that's
secretion.
Right. Yeah, and it's full of peptides. Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you there.
No, go for it.
Yeah. So if we're looking at things from a more scientific perspective, we know a little bit about the secretion. In 1986, an Italian, I think it was a pharmacologist, Vittorio Erspamer, I believe his name was. He's actually the guy who discovered the neurotransmitter serotonin, and for some of his work, I can't remember what it was, but he was nominated twice for the Nobel Prize. And he concluded that this Amazonian frog contained I think he said something like a fantastic chemical cocktail of all of these peptides. And for the past 3 decades, pharmaceutical companies, I guess science in general, the world of medicine has been trying to isolate these various peptides for specific medical reasons. Well, I suppose that's what medicine does, yeah? It finds these kind of natural compounds and tries to reduce them to one single peptide and go, this particular peptide or this particular chemical component is going to reduce blood pressure. Yeah, so they've been trying to do this for 30 years. However, I think that, and this goes for a lot of the natural medicines, that the whole is much greater than the part. And that's not always the case, but I think for most of the time it is. It's important to come to these traditional medicines as a whole and not just like pick little bits and pieces out, because they've been time tested for thousands of years. This is the way they've done it. It's worked this way for thousands of years, and it's worked for a reason. And they keep doing it the same way for a reason, because it works.
Yeah. So frog poison, you burn, I guess, a small mark on the skin.
And important to make a distinction, because a lot of people think it's a poison, but it's not classified as a poison. At least I do not classify it as a poison. When we're talking about a poison, the body doesn't recognize it as being a poison, and people go through intense processes where their heart speeds up, they start sweating, they go through cathartic processes, they start shaking, they're purging, maybe they've got diarrhea, sometimes all at the same time. But it may look like the body has become poisoned, and a lot of people see that and go, oh, well, that's clearly the sign of being poisoned. But the peptides in the frog are considered bioactive, which essentially just means that they induce specific biological functions in the body. So this particular peptide will induce a long-lasting reduction in blood pressure. This other one, we know that it induces smooth muscle contraction. This other one induces enhanced bile production. So these peptides are all coming together and they're inducing these physical processes on the body. And the body sees the peptides as if the body had made them itself. It's like, oh yeah, I know what that peptide is. I'll just slot that into place here, and I'll slot that one into place here, and off we go. We do our physical thing, and this starts to get into the colorful kind of spiritual language, but the medicine is so intuitive and has its own wisdom to it that it knows how to navigate each individual system and what needs to be addressed first and foremost. So the body doesn't see it as a poison. The body sees it as, well, something that it has produced itself. But in saying that, yeah, the dose makes the poison with everything.
Of course.
Water can be poison if we're drinking 6 gallons just straight off.
So you've talked about when you have this, when you have Kambo, like, so obviously some of the physical, I guess, some of the physical reactions are that obviously it creates that purging feeling, which is obviously a result of the peptides, but obviously more of a spiritual purging as well. So from your experience, what has been the experience of people that you have dealt with? What are some of the things that you've seen from some of the clients and the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, in a lot of, I guess, in our Western culture, I suppose, from the Western viewpoint, whenever we are vomiting, it's seen as being unwell. However, in many plant-based cultures, traditional or indigenous cultures with a connection to some of these medicines, they use purgatives quite regularly. And when they're going through these purging processes, they don't see it as being sick, they see it as getting well. And we're certainly not the only animals to ingest certain things to help us purge and to help us cleanse the system. Prime example, dogs. Dogs or cats going outside and eating grass, all kinds of animals ingesting certain things to help them eliminate, I guess, toxins, pathogens out of the system. So as I mentioned before, there's a wide range of why people come into ceremony, whether it's the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual disconnection. So what I generally see, for the most part, and this is a generalization, is a lot of people going through a very physical kind of process. And people come out of the experience a little bit, well, a lot of the time, a little bit dazed, kind of like, well, what happened? How long did pass just then? It's been what? It's been 5 hours since the beginning of ceremony until the end of ceremony. Where did all that time kind of go? And people who have worked with Kambo before might be thinking, oh, well, 5 hours, just that's a long time, because typically the experience only lasts from 20 to 40, sometimes 60 minutes tops. However, the way that I work with this medicine, there's typically other energetic work that happens as well. And I incorporate a few other things to help open up people's systems so they can become more sensitive and receptive to the medicine so that it can come in and work on a much deeper level. But what I see is typically people releasing, exactly what I talked about, releasing emotional afflictions that have been hindering them for years, maybe decades, through, whether that's through cathartic processes of releasing into the body or Kambo releasing, kind of uprooting things, as I mentioned, and allowing those things to bubble up in the days to come so the body can release them. Or it might be a deeper connection to the nature by sitting around the fire and recognizing that we or they are communing with a sentience and intelligence other than themselves. When we ingest these plant or animal compounds, components, the way that I see it is a weaving of our human consciousness with plant consciousness or with animal consciousness. And that's a whole other conversation about consciousness and perhaps animism and panpsychism, which we could touch on and go down later. But yeah, a lot of the times I see people who are coming into ceremony and stepping deeper into their truth and feeling more aligned to their heart because they have the opportunity to release the things that are holding them back from stepping into that. All the conditioning that's being pulled on from society, culture, family, friends, ever since we were birthed, from our mother's womb, from the sacred fluids into this physical realm.
Yeah. And are there any sort of elements or themes that you see more and more of sort of through your clients that you work with? Like, is it more sort of childhood trauma, or is it more things to do with addiction? Is it stuff to do with relationships? Like, is there a common theme that you see?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, one of the common themes that I see is through a lot of daily stress, just the typical stress, which leads to a lot of anxiety and depression. Very, very common. And we see that they are prevalent afflictions throughout the entirety of the Western world. And if we were to ask why, then again, we go down the similar trail. And it's like when we're addressing these things, we don't want to just address the surface level symptoms. We want to try and get to the root cause, which is a lot of these traumas that people are carrying. And it's a lot of the disconnection, the disconnection to the heart, or the disconnection from the heart, and the disconnection from nature. So a lot of times people are feeling this anxiety and depression because there's a disconnection, because they're holding these self-limiting beliefs like, I'm not good enough, I can't do that, I'm unworthy, I'm unloved. So it facilitates that reconnection back to the heart.
Yeah.
And of course, when we're reconnecting back to ourselves, we feel like we can connect with others on a deeper level. We connect with tribe. And then of course that expands out. We connect back to the natural world, or at least we have the opportunity to start seeing things from a different perspective because we've done so much inner work, and that positive feedback loop kind of keeps going.
For sure. So I know it's one of those things that you said, obviously there is a disconnection at the moment between, the way that we're living, the way we should be living, with ourselves, with the plants, with earth and stuff like that. A big part of obviously, having these experiences is self-reflection. And because of what you do with clients, obviously those realizations aren't always going to be there immediately. So have you ever heard, comments or feedbacks from some of the people that you work with, 1 month, 2 months, even a year down the track, and that they've sort of shared what the realization that they've come to from this experience?
I can't really speak to any specific realizations from specific individuals, but what I can say is that people often contact me 1 month, 3 months, even 6 months down the track saying, I'm still working on the stuff that came up during ceremony. That stuff brought up some childhood insecurities that I didn't know were there, and I'm still working on them. And that kind of speaks to one of the most important pieces of doing this kind of work, which is the integration process. It's all well and good for these sacred medicines, traditional medicines, whether they're plant, animal, fungi, otherwise. While they are very, very potent catalysts for these states of consciousness, these states of being, these states of self-reflection and introspection that they can induce, we have to work in conjunction with what these experiences have to offer. So we have to be engaged in constant daily work. Yeah, that constant self-reflection work. If people are working on those limiting beliefs or whatever it is, yeah, having their finger on the pulse, so to say, and going, okay, why am I like this? I need to. Okay, I'm getting triggered by my family. Yeah, whenever they say this, I start to get angry or I start to get disconnected. So it's offering. Well, these medicines are offering us the opportunity to walk a path in daily life where we are integrating the lessons that pop up from these experiences, and also to just keep working on the self, to keep doing those deeper levels of self-inquiry and reflection to gain deeper levels of self-awareness.
So it's not easy to do, like, whether you are using plant-based medicines to help you with self-reflection, or you're doing it through other ways of altering your states of consciousness, or even you're just meditating, or you're sitting down and actually thinking about things. Getting in a state of self-reflection in modern day society with all of these distractions from, our mobile phones, we've got things that buzz, we've got, there's all of these distractions. And I think I've found it, even myself, it's very, very difficult to actually stop and do self-reflection. So do you have any tips? We'll start with those of your clients that have used plant-based medicines to help them, I guess, purge to light some of the, the deeper challenges that may be sort of residing inside. What advice would you give, or what tips have you got for those that have had a plant-based experience to help them get into that self-reflective mode from the experience that they've had? What does it look like? And how...
Well, if we're talking about self-reflection in general, we're speaking to being up in the mind again, which has its benefits, but we also don't want to focus solely on the mind. We want to also focus on practices that get us connected back to the body, connected back to the heart. But speaking to self-reflection, I think some of the more potent practices that have helped myself earlier on in my journey, and even still today, are meditation. So uber important to take the time to sit and engage in meditation. There's various forms, whether that's noticing or placing our focus on the inflow and outflow of the breath, which we might call a kind of a narrowed focus, yeah, or whether we're sitting in meditation with an open focus and just noticing what happens within our moment-to-moment experience, whether that's paying attention to the sounds that we're hearing, the sensations, the flow of energy in our body, the thoughts that just constantly stream in and out. So both open and focused states of meditation are important, so we can start to become more self-aware. Yeah, because that self-awareness is what helps us as people become more attentive to this constant stream of thoughts that infiltrate us. So when we become more aware of the thoughts that come, we can become more aware of all the patterns and programs that aren't serving us. So meditation is a big one. Also journaling, I think, as well. There's something about putting pen to paper that allows deeper access into the workings of the mind. And whether, to use the language that I used before, the whispers of the subconscious mind, whether they are filtering through, or whether we're just really taking the time to write down what thoughts are actually appearing in our mind with specific intention, with specific questions or things that we want to address. I think that journaling can be another very, very potent practice. And also engaging in certain types of learning, whether it's going to workshops or spending time with others who are walking a path or are embodying a state of being or consciousness that you yourself want to hang out with. There's so many sources where people are learning these days, whether it's the books, it's the podcasts, the audio books, the documentaries, anything that helps us expand our consciousness and expand our sense of self. So I think that's important when it comes to self-reflection, but we also don't want to negate, as I said, the connection to the body. So that's the mind part. So for a couple of other tips, and these are, for me, just stock standard fundamentals when it comes to laying a solid foundation in daily life, but especially more so doing this intense work with sacred medicines. And some of those are spending time in nature, making sure we get sunlight. Again, the meditation, the awareness of the breath, making sure we're staying well hydrated, making sure we are nourishing ourselves with wholesome, healthy foods. We're staying away from inflammatory foods. We're staying away from anything artificial, anything that we know causes a disharmony in our body. And I think it's really important to start eliminating all of the things that we know cause inflammation or cause that disharmony as well. So yeah, a movement practice as well, something to help get us into the body, whether it's something like Tai Chi or yoga, or whether it's physical exercise, something to help ground the body, because oftentimes these experiences can be either very cerebral or very intergalactic, we might say. So having practices to get back down into the body, super important, especially when we're going through that self-reflective work and we can just be super overwhelmed by being up here in the thoughts and we're trying to work on ourselves. It's like, yeah, that's all fantastic, but come back down here into the body as well. Come back down here into the present moment, because the mind, it's great for figuring stuff out. It's great for reason, for logic, for rationality, but oftentimes we're not here in the present. The mind loves to ruminate in the past, loves to project into the future, and we're oftentimes living 5 minutes ahead of where we actually are right now.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do, and like you said, because not everyone is obviously going to want to have a plant-based experience. And like I said, I think you've given some really good and practical tips for those of you to get into that sort of reflective state. You've talked about journaling and the importance of that, and that's something that a lot of, I guess, the most brilliant minds, if we want to say, of like the 20th century, have said in terms of just keeping a daily journal and the importance of actually analyzing your thoughts. And then we spoke about the importance of meditation and breathing and, getting in touch with nature. And these are all things that we've lost, we've disconnected from over the years. And one of the most important things, or one of the most interesting things that I've found to help get in a reflective state or to alter consciousness from a natural perspective has been breathing. So one of the most interesting experiences I've had from a consciousness perspective was when I was doing deep, I guess you could call it holotropic breathing, which is really deep, quick breathing for about half an hour in a group with about, there was 100 plus people in the room. This was actually Wim Hof. So I'm sure you've heard of Wim Hof, who's the Dutch world record holder. He has cold showers, he has ice baths, all that sort of stuff. Anyways, we're in the room with Wim Hof. We were deep breathing for almost half an hour. And then he got us to hold our breath on the way out. And because you've been deep breathing for so long, you can literally hold your breath for about 5 minutes, like to the untrained person. And through that period of time, like I'll start by saying, I think what science has shown is that when you get engaged in deep breathing like that, it can trigger the release of DMT in the brain. So the experience that I had when in that sort of breathing state, I literally left my body, and it's something that I can't explain. And even certain times I do it on a micro level. Even if I just deep breathe in and out 30 or 40 times and then hold my breath, it literally takes me to a different place, and I feel completely different. And I don't know, the deep down science behind it, but even just breath in everyday life. Because if I think about, even right now, I'm very, very shallow breathing. I'm probably only breathing in and out about 20% of my lungs capacity. And I think something like that can really just reset the brain, reset the body from that perspective. So, whilst, you deal with plant-based medicines and a lot of other things, I think there are many other ways that are natural. I mean, plants are natural too, but many other ways without taking something external to help you get into those states and those frames of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about plant medicines, sacred medicines, altered states of consciousness, that often, it links back into shamanism. Yeah. And shamans and the practice of shamanism is essentially one of humanity's first expressions of spirituality. And deeply intertwined with that is altered states of consciousness. And it's a way of relating to the cosmos and connecting with the energies of the natural world, as we mentioned, both seen, unseen, physical, spiritual, the metaphysical and material. And there are many different ways to alter consciousness. So plant medicines is one, but not everyone wants to go through them because of their intense nature. But of course, there's breath work, like you said, different types of breath work, Wim Hof, transformational, shamanic, holotropic. And there's other things as well that shamans and people in our day and age are using as well, such as your Kundalini yogas, your ecstatic dance, whether it's vision quests, fasting, which a lot of people are doing. So there's a lot of different modalities to alter one's consciousness to different degrees, different levels of intensity, that can still provide access to these different paradigms that we're speaking to.
For sure. So we've spoken about Kambo, and I think you said you also work with the San Pedro cactus. Is that correct? So if you would explain sort of what that is as a plant medicine and how that, say, differs to Kambo.
So Kambo is not classified as a psychedelic. Yeah? It's not a psychedelic medicine. Things like ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus, wachuma, they are classified as psychedelics, or perhaps a more appropriate word might be entheogens, which is probably a word that you're familiar with. Yeah, entheogens, typically meaning generating the divine within, having access to the divine within, because that's what a lot of these plant sacraments facilitate. Allowing us to recognize this sacredness, this interconnected with the whole of the cosmos within ourselves. So the San Pedro cactus, traditional Quechua name, wachuma, stems from the high Andes regions of South America, Peru, Ecuador, Chile. It's a medicine that helps facilitate a deep connection to nature and a deep connection to the heart. It's been used for many thousands of years. The earliest archaeological records that we have of wachuma being used date back to 3,500 years ago. And these archaeological findings they stem from a place, well, they stem from many places, but this one place in particular that I'm thinking of. And I spoke about Spirit Quest earlier, I believe, and Don Howard at Spirit Quest is a master when it comes to navigating these worlds of wachuma and ayahuasca. But wachuma in the context of the Shavin culture, the Shavin civilization of working with these plant medicines. And the Shavin were a high Andean culture that existed 3,500 years ago. And at the center, the epicenter of their culture was the use of this particular plant sacrament and another plant sacrament as well, known as vilca. And if people want to learn more about this, you could certainly do a Google search. Aubrey Marcus has talked about this in particular. He's actually talked about it with Don Howard, so a much more wise and intelligent source when it comes to this medicine than I am, who I've only been walking this path for several years now. I started down this path 7 or 8 years ago, but with the use of these Amazonian plants, maybe only, what's it been now? 4 to 5, something like that. But this is a master we're talking about that's been working with it for many, many, many decades. But this Shavin culture was known as the cradle of consciousness. The cradle of consciousness because it used wachuma, San Pedro cactus, and vilca at the core of its civilization. So these medicines facilitated a deep expansion of heart consciousness, specifically heart consciousness, that connection to the heart. So this brew, it is a long-lasting brew, lasts anywhere from 12 to 16 hours when ingested. It's conducted in ceremonial context as well, although people do use this particular substance in recreational fashion, although I don't think there's inherently any right or wrong ways to use psychedelics, and perhaps that's a philosophical, moral discussion to have. But yeah, I think it's important to approach these with a lot of respect and a lot of reverence, conducted in a ceremonial fashion. And it's a lot of different kinds of medicine. It's heart medicine, it's reflective, contemplative medicine, it's deeply connective medicine to the natural world. In conjunction to something like ayahuasca, which helps us connect to these unseen energies of the cosmos, the deep spirit world. Wachuma is more of an earth-based connective medicine, and that we typically have a deeper relationship with the earth while we're drinking it. Most people drink wachuma during the day. It can be drunk during the night time as well, but in this day and age, mostly ceremonies are conducted during the day to facilitate that community connection and to facilitate that nature-based connection as well. Whereas ayahuasca, as I mentioned, is just full intergalactic exploration. Wachuma can be connecting with the energies all around us.
And you've had similar experiences with clients as well in terms of what they get out of it and what they can expect while on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similar reasons. All of these sacred medicines have their own unique flavors, their own signature expression in the way that they work and the processes that they induce within people. But in saying that, they still work on these primary levels of existence, whether it's clearing out the physical illnesses, as I said, the emotional, the mental, and that spiritual connection. Yeah, but yes, a lot of people come to a deeper embodiment of that connection to nature. You know, we have a conceptual kind of understanding. It's like, yeah, okay, we're a part of nature. You know, we know that, you know, through evolutionary processes, Earth begun however many billions of years ago, and then bacteria started to form, and, you know, yada yada. Here we are as human beings. So we've come from a long lineage of ancestors, both human and non-human. So we know that we're interconnected on a conceptual level. But there's a difference between understanding that on that intellectual level and really embodying it on a visceral, experiential, knowing and wisdom like level.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things, I think, in modern day society that we've touched on this several times, but there's a disconnect, and we're all in some way, I think, out of touch with who we are, where we've come from, and what it means to, you know, think less with our head and more with our heart. You know, so based off that, we'll start to wrap up because we've been going for nearly an hour 10. But obviously, with what you're doing, obviously signifies a shift in society, and obviously more people are starting to explore these things. There's more people in meditation and all of these sorts of things. Do you think there's a shift in society? And, you know, what are you seeing?
I think there is, and I think that's something that a lot of people say. There's a shift in consciousness happening. However, I do think that's true, but I also question it as well, because I think the more that we expand our own consciousness and expand as human beings ourselves, then we are opening ourselves up to resonate at a frequency which is attracting other people which are resonating at a similar frequency. So while I do think that more people are expanding their consciousness and waking up, I also think that it's not fast enough. Well, there's perhaps not as much growth in that area as people might suggest. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that people are just noticing or finding the tribe more. But in saying that, maybe through the collective gathering that is amplifying that spiritual connection at the same time, because more people are coming together and more people through social media and through technology are linking their threads and their tentacles into this tapestry of expanded consciousness.
Sure.
So I do think there is a shift in society and, you know, and culture, I suppose. And I suppose what we're doing is we're in the process now of weaving new strands of culture together. And I think that's uber needed in our Western world, yeah, where it seems we don't really lack culture, but we see it as a lack of culture because we don't have a lot of the traditions passed down because so many of us come from different places around the world, yeah? Especially here in Australia, we're such a multicultural country. Some of us were born here, some of us were born overseas, but we've forgotten a lot of our ancestry and the traditions that come with that. So I think it's a remembrance, it's a reconnection of remembering some of the traditions from our own ancestry and weaving these new traditions and rituals to form our own cultural paradigm at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So true. And like you said, particularly here in Australia, we're so multicultural. We are a young nation, and, you know, we're still forming our own cultural identity and what that means. And I think a lot of people are looking back to just the generic culture of the humans, you know, past. So, and that's why I think we're seeing the rise of a lot of more ancestral diets, you know, like the paleo diet, if you will, going back to what we're designed to eat. You know, a lot more people are getting into earthing, you know, walking barefoot on the earth and having that connection with nature. So there is a shift, I think, happening from that perspective. People are starting to look for ways that they can live more harmoniously with themselves and with the earth. So I think that is happening, and I think it's only going to be a good thing.
It's the great remembrance, brother.
Absolutely. And as Graham Hancock eloquently puts, we're a species with amnesia. We've forgotten our past. And I think a lot of it is just reconnecting with what's happened in the past. So your business, where can people find you? What can they expect?
It's funny to call it a business. But I suppose it is a business, but it's also just a way of walking in the world as well. In relation to Medicine Path and Kambo Path, which are the names of my two websites, If people want to find out more, they can certainly head there, medicinepath.net, kambopath.net. They can connect with me on social media as well, chris.medicinepath, Facebook and Instagram, I believe they are the tags, as people call them. And yeah, people should come and check me out there if they're interested in this kind of work and interested in connecting.
Yep, all of the links will be in the description.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years' time with what you're doing?
Where do I see myself? I would like to see myself with a deeper experiential understanding and connection to the natural world and the natural cycles of nature. Yeah, being more deeply connected to the natural rhythms. Yeah, coming to understand and really feel on a visceral level the changes through spring and summer and autumn and winter, and seeing those archetypal energies within myself. So having that deeper relationship through looking at what's happening in the natural world and seeing, okay, how's that applying to myself in my daily life? So from a personal perspective, that's where I see myself deepening down this path, deepening down the path of reconnecting, right relationship with all of nature. In terms of some of the offerings that I'm putting out there into the world, I'd like to be on larger land, and offering more of these services from just a larger premises, so people can come and they can do their plant medicine work. They can come and engage in lots of different holistic therapies, such as your yogas and your meditations and all kind of artistic and creative expressions. So I'm expanding towards that direction. But as we know, life has many ebbs and flows. And while the vision is there, oftentimes the tributaries run off in different directions. But yeah, essentially they're all leading towards the same place.
And what's something you'd like to do more of that you're not currently doing?
Something that I would like to do more of, geez, my partner probably wouldn't like this answer, but playing more guitar, I suppose. But obviously there's the weaving of family time. I've got a little 12-month-old bub. She's almost 12 months old, a little girl. So it's a weaving of spending time with family and doing the ceremonial work, spending time writing, as we mentioned before, navigating the world of technology and social media in relation to actually being with the natural world. But yeah, playing guitar a lot more, singing, songwriting, things of that nature.
Beautiful. Any final words of wisdom before we finish up?
Any final words of wisdom? I think that silence sums it up best, brother.
That's all good. We will finish it there. So Chris, thank you for your time today. And I'll put all the descriptions, all of your links in the show notes. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.